Hello there guys, RP792 here. Been a few days since I've had an opportunity to record one of these, but I did say I would continue on with my general rundown of the 40k universe. So, last time I talked about Chaos, and this time I said I would talk about the Eldar. Now, the Eldar are kind of an interesting race from the simple reason that when Games Workshop were creating the 40k universe, or the basic building blocks of it, their initial intention was to basically transplant their existing races from the Warhammer tabletop game and then give them a kind of spacey twist. So the Eldar are basically the elves of the Warhammer 40k universe, but just saying they are elves is doing them a disservice. That's where they started, but they've now got an awful lot of lore and backstory and their own unique quirks and things like that. So you will certainly hear a lot of things that say, yep, that sounds space elfy to me. That's most apparent in the way that they fight. You know, that they are basically very fast, very aggressive, very powerful, but they're also basically made out of twigs. You know, you can break an Eldar with a good punch. So, you know, that they are very much the they are the glass cannons of the 40k universe. Basically, they hit hard, but they do not have staying power. They have, you know, in, hit, run is pretty much Eldar combat tactics, which is fair enough. But to talk about the Eldar, we're going to have to go back a ways. Specifically back to a time period somewhere in the region of the Dark Age of technology. Or, well, technically we need to go back further than that, but anyway. So the Eldar society had basically spread throughout a fairly substantial chunk of the galaxy. They ruled over an awful lot of it, and for the most part their civilization was pretty decent, you know. Very powerful psychers, an awful lot of them. You know, sources quibble on this. Some say that it's basically their entire race is either psychic or has strong psychic potential, and others just say it's just a particularly large chunk of their population. I'm genuinely not sure which it is. It doesn't really matter. A lot of very powerful psychics in the Eldar species. And as a result, you know, that they were basically able to, among other things, create some very, very advanced technology that basically meant they didn't have to do anything. That, you know, they had technology advanced so much that there was no need for them to do anything for their own survival. So all they had to do was find ways to amuse themselves. And this started off fine, you know, that they created a lot of very impressive art, they created music, they created, you know, all the wonderful things that a culture can create. No idea if they created their own video games, but they probably did. Unfortunately, as time went on, you know, those things started to get boring and the culture started to stagnate. And they eventually ended up with what became referred to as pleasure cults. These were basically groups of Eldar who would get together and do whatever the hell they wanted to feel good. This ranged from meaningless sex to, you know, acts of violence. You got fight clubs. You got God knows what else going on in there. And, you know, you almost certainly got some fairly unpleasant things as well, as, you know, groups of them would get together and do unpleasant things to other groups, and as a general rule of thumb, it started to fall apart. Their entire civilization began to slowly fall apart. They became hedonistic. And it's somewhere around the time period of the Dark Age of technology, the Eldar basically reached a critical point, and an awful lot of them realized what was happening, and they left on giant spaceships known as craft worlds, which are, to all intents and purposes, artificial planets with, you know, hundreds of thousands, if not millions or even billions of Eldar on them. And they basically got the hell off their home worlds and started running. Some of them did not get far enough, because eventually all the psychic energy from all this, you know, all the sex, all the pain, all the lust, and the desire for passion and pleasure, it eventually all coalesced in the warp, and it reached a critical mass, and it led to the birth of the Chaos God Slaanesh. And I mentioned last time that when Slaanesh was born, that was what created the Eye of Terror. Yeah, that was created right smack over the Eldar homeworlds. So the Eye of Terror is basically what used to be Eldar territory, and it's now a twisted warped bit of reality where the laws of physics do not apply and everything is just totally screwed up. Some of the craft worlds got clear of what would become the area known as the Eye of Terror before it all happened. Some of them did not and got ripped apart. And some Eldar from those worlds survived and eventually became the Dark Eldar. I'll talk about those guys later. Dark Eldar are complex enough that they actually deserve their own separate video. But the Eldar that survived on the escaping craft worlds basically became a nomad species because they're just moving around the galaxy on their giant ships, which do not move terribly fast, but they are on the move, and they are, I'm not going to say safe because nobody's safe in the 40k universe, but they move around for their own protection. And of course each craft world has its own subtle differences from each other. There are some that have particularly that train in certain forms of combat and things like that, but the craft world, the Eldar basically as a race are dying because while there are theoretically enough of them left, the universe is too hostile for them to actually settle down and try and find a place to call home and repair the mistakes of their ancestors. Particularly since the birth of Slaanesh created a massive warp storm that went on for literally millennia. Their ability to travel FTL. Eldar FTL doesn't work in quite the same way as other people's FTL. They don't specifically travel through the warp, they travel through the webway. And the webway is kind of like... Okay, this is going to get kind of complicated. Think of the warp as a massive raging river. The webway is a tunnel beneath it. The webway is basically a tunnel that's protected and allows you to traverse very, very quickly. But if the tunnel gets breached and things from the warp start flooding in, that is very, very, very bad. So the Eldar had to be very careful moving around the webway. It used to be this vast, massive network, and these days there's all sorts of passages in it that are hideously dangerous, some that are downright suicidal to even think about going through, and some parts of it are completely viable to use. So they are masters of getting in and out quickly by using the webway, because it is faster than going through the general purpose warp, because part of the aspect of the webway is it shields from the nature of the warp around it. But obviously if there's a major warp storm going on, that still slows them down, because they've got to be a lot more careful going through it in case its shell fractures and things from the outside get in, which is obviously very, very bad. So, as I say, the Eldar are basically a nomad dying people, and they tend to... Their rulers are more often than not Farseers. Farseers are this particular subgroup of Eldar who can use powerful psychic abilities to see the future, or see potential futures. And they can basically do this because the warp itself is not bound by 4 dimensions, so you can use the warp to see through time if you know what you're doing. If you're inexperienced and you try it, the odds are it's going to drive you insane attempting. So not the best idea unless you're well trained and well prepared for it. So so a lot of their knowledge of what they should do is guided by visions of the future. The Eldar hate the forces of chaos at least as much as the Imperium does, and that's why quite often you will find the Eldar and the Imperium making temporary alliances. Just playing Battlefleet Gothic Armada, one of the things you can do is that the Eldar will basically say, look, this chaos threat is a major threat to both of us. We don't like you, you don't like us, but we hate those guys a hell of a lot more. So you can, if you choose, you can team up with the Eldar, and that gives you some advantages in the fight against chaos. And that's a fairly common thread throughout a lot of 40k fiction. It's the enemy of my enemy is still a dick, but I'll work with him. So the Eldar are, while they are certainly hostile to the Imperium, they are not the most hostile. The human beings and Eldar can work together, and work together quite well in a way that does actually give them a reasonable chance of saving the galaxy, as it were. The only problem is those alliances are almost always short-lived. It's one particular fleet commander forms an alliance, or it's one particular Space Marine captain basically says, "Yep, we'll agree not to kill you if you help us fight off this chaos invasion," and then piss off. And things like that. The Eldar also have a habit of not actually explaining what the hell they're doing. More than one pointless battle has been caused with the Eldar because they just wouldn't. The entire part of the major plot line of the original Dawn of War is basically if the Eldar had just told the Space Marines, what they were doing and why they were there and what they were there to prevent, they probably wouldn't have had to kill each other all the time, thus weakening both forces before the forces of chaos arrived. So the Eldar are by no means they are arguably the brightest in the galaxy in that sense, but they're also arrogant and they're kind of dicks, which those two usually go hand in hand. So the Eldar, I maintain, are a very interesting species. One interesting thing about them is that all Eldar fear Slaanesh in particular, and they are convinced that when they die, if their souls enter the warp, Slaanesh will consume them, and they're probably right. So the Eldar and the Dark Eldar have two very different ways of dealing with that. As I said, I'll talk about the Dark Eldar later. But the Eldar basically each have a soul stone in their built into their armor, and what that basically does is it's a sort of psychically charged rock. Actually, technically it's kind of this crystalline structure thing, whatever the hell it is, and basically upon their death, their soul is absorbed by that stone, and it's part of the duty of their comrades to it's almost like grabbing a dead soldier's dog tags just so you've got at least something. Except in this case it's a teensy bit more important. It's their actual bona fide soul, or their psychic emanations, or whatever you care to think of. And there are vast galleries aboard the craft worlds that basically just have millions upon billions of these soul stones placed together. And the issue of whether they, again, it's something that's debated by various 40k writers as to whether or not they're, how conscious they are and whether or not they talk to each other. And you can certainly, if you're a particularly strong Eldar Psyker, you can actually, effectively touch one of these soul stones and communicate with the consciousness inside. So that certainly can be done. Eldar technology is also quite strong. I like a lot of the Eldar tech because it's grown. It's not quite organic, but it's not quite. A lot of it's based around this substance called Wraithbone, which is actually created by quote unquote singing to it, which is it's kind of interesting. As I say, you can tell that bit kind of came from elves. The idea of them basically growing what they use in their weapons, as that kind of in touch with nature stuff that elves always have, and that kind of fed into the Wraithbone idea. And as I say, Eldar units tend to be relatively fragile, but very, very powerful. They hit like trains, but they but they die from one good tap. And the Eldar, a lot of their people are very, very focused. You tend to get them focusing on one particular path, especially in combat. So for example, you have their warp spiders, who are very interesting units because they basically use the way teleportation works in the 40k universe is you basically very briefly jump into the warp and then jump out of it somewhere nearby-ish, but not. The limits of teleportation are relatively severe, but you can it's like Star Trek distance. You can usually get from a planet down to from a spaceship down to a planet and that kind of thing. But warp spiders basically use it for extreme short range jumps. So they use it in combat. So they leap around, fire off bursts of energy, leap out, fire off another burst, and things like that. And they're kind of interesting. And that, of course, takes a lot of training and a hell of a lot of nerve. Going into the warp is dangerous when you've got a bloody starship to protect you. Going in with just your body armor requires a hell of a lot of nerve. There's a reason why most Space Marines don't like using teleporters if they can avoid it. It's not fun. Then you've got things like Banshees, which are so named by the Imperium because they basically scream this horrific scream when they're coming into attack range. And they charge in with honking great swords, and they get up close and personal and very nasty. And then you've got weird things like the Harlequins, which are meant to be effectively priestesses of their laughing god. Basically, imagine a psychotic killer jester. Basically, Harlequins are really kind of fun because they just bounce and bounce and bounce and bounce and stab. And Harlequins are actually nominally neutral. Harlequins, I believe, are the only non-Dark Eldar that the Dark Eldar won't kill on sight. They're effectively deemed neutral between the two, and if they turn up, they'll basically put on a performance. They might help you kill their enemies while they're at it, and then they'll bugger off and just do their own thing. And they're meant to be sort of in league with the Laughing God. And the Eldar did have a number of gods. The most well-known of which is, of course, Kala Menchikane, who was their war god, who's basically this giant, flaming, monstrous thing with a big sword, who will just, absolutely murder anybody who messes with his people. And there's all kinds of, things that basically Slaanesh. One of the first things that it did was basically consume the Eldar gods. And there's an issue of, there are kind of shards of them left that they can occasionally use to summon them into battle. Sorry. That they can use to summon them into battle. So one of their great champions can basically sacrifice themselves to bring the avatar of Kala Menchikane to the battlefield, which is a giant hulking thing that will kill anything it comes into contact with. So in the Dawn of War series, whenever the Eldar need a super unit, it's the avatar of Kala Menchikane who turns up and starts killing things. So, as the Eldar are certainly not my favourite 40k race, but there is all sorts of interesting backstory and lore to them, and they are kind of an interesting race. So, who should I talk about next time? I've mentioned the Dark Eldar a few times, so I probably ought to talk about them, but they're much more of a minor race than anything I've talked about yet, so I'll save them for later. Logically, I should talk about the Orcs, given that they're the ones who always turn up in pretty much any 40k media. It's always the Orcs and Chaos are the two that turn up most commonly as the adversaries. In fact, it's more often not both of them. But tell you what, I'll talk about the Tau. Next one, I'm going to talk about the Tau just because the Tau are very, very different from the Eldar. In fact, they're pretty much at the exact opposite end of the scale in a way that's kind of interesting contrast. So, thank you very much for watching. I hope you're enjoying these little primers on 40k lore, and I will see you in future videos.